Welcome back to Bisexual Killjoy, the place where we know bisexuality isn't a phase, it's a phenomenon. I'm Bailey, and this is
Lynn.
So, we are diving into a medium that has long been overlooked for the depth and power that it brings to storytelling. Comics, which have this unique ability to transcend traditional boundaries and invite readers into complex, nuanced narratives through a blend of imagery and storytelling. And when it comes to bi plus stories, that kind of layered visual storytelling is vital, right? And we are very excited to bring our expert, Kat Calamia, into the conversation.
Thank you.
Kat Calamia is a co-writer and co-creator of The Witches of Oz, The Beast and Snow, and Nightmare in Wonderland. You may know her best from her other creator-owned titles, Webtoons Slice of Life, Like Father, Like Daughter, They Call Her The Dancer, and By Visibility, a bisexual comic book anthology. Thank you so much for being here, Kat.
No, thanks for having me. I just reading off all those titles, I was like, oh yeah, there's a lot of titles there.
Well, you know, this is something that's really cool about comics is she's got a reputation. She's got like this bad reputation that has changed. People in the know how nuanced and complicated and good comics are. And then basically boomers are like, but comics are for kids. Okay, don't simplify it like that. But for me, visual language comics have always been such a dynamic and cool place because I cannot draw worth a damn. But
me either.
I don't know if I'd agree with that. Having like look through your picture, I'm like, I'd lie. First lie, we just got started. But they transcend boundaries. And for the bi plus community whose experiences are often misunderstood or erased, comics really do seem like this perfect medium where our voices can be seen and embrace our nuances. But before we dive into all of that, Kat, I would actually just love to hear about your journey as an artist and what led you to ultimately undertake this really gorgeous project, you know, your comic anthology.
Yeah, I've been a comic fan all my life. My dad got me into comics. I read like Superman books and stuff like that. And I was born in a time where, you know, Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man came out and X-Men Evolution. I was like, oh, this is cool. I wonder, because my dad read these Superman comics to me, are there other comics that are based on these things? And there were. And, you know, again, grew up with DC stuff, but then like got into my own stuff with Marvel. Went to college, wrote a screenplay for like Fall Like Daughter, you know, what ended up being my superhero comic book. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to do something in television. I got a master's in TV. And again, you never know, but I kind of leaned more into comic books and made a career out of it and did that superhero book and then realized, okay, I kind of want to write more stuff. That's when I wrote The Dancer to pitch that around. And then By Visibility came and I said, okay, what's doing well on Kickstarter is anthologies. I'm bi. I don't feel like there's enough stories out here talking about bisexuality. I was shocked that there was no real comics that did an anthology about it. So I'm like, why the hell not? And that literally changed my career. It got over 1,000 backers, about $30,000. And then because of that project, I became part of Kickstarter's Creator Council. So I worked with Kickstarter themselves to make a better platform. We got a really good relationship with them. On those meetings, we talked to like the CEO of Kickstarter on a monthly basis. So I got really connected to Kickstarter and again, made my career out of that with the other books we mentioned. We did some not safe for work queer books as well. That's done really well on Kickstarter. Beast and Snow made $80,000 on its first issue. So it all started with By Visibility. We made a second volume of By Visibility as well. And now we're doing other queer anthologies to lift up other people's voices. As a bi person, I was so happy to do that for my community. I want to see it for others too. So we just did a trans anthology with my business partner's brother who led that. And then we're going to announce this in the next couple of weeks, but we're doing an Ace anthology with another creator who's like within the Marvel and DC realm. So we're trying to represent a lot of people because again, By Visibility was so important to me in particular.
Yeah. You know, we talk about bi visibility a lot on this podcast, but that doesn't even touch the amount of ace invisibility problems, right?
Sure.
I would love to know more about your thoughts on kind of comics as a medium for storytelling, especially as it pertains to bi narratives, which, as you know, are often erased.
Yeah, no, I think, well, comics as a whole, you know, I totally agree what you were saying earlier in the show that I feel like a lot of people just see as like this kids thing. But also when you go in the comic book store, a lot of older people read comics now. And now it's almost the flip side where only older people are reading comics and you're like in the comic book store at least. But then there's like Webtoon and Kickstarter where you're like, oh, that's how young people are getting their books. How do we bring these people together? And that's something I wanted to do with Kickstarter is that you have the traditional medium of physical books that we want to give transformative. And then we use Webtoon for our other queer story slice of life, where you're getting a lot of those people that don't even know they're reading comics. So I think that's really interesting. When it comes to bi-ness, I mean, you could go on forever with movies and TV shows need more representation. But comics, there's a few characters, especially if you're looking at like Marvel and DC. You have like Constantine, you have Kitty Pryde is supposedly going to have a really big story about her bisexuality. Right now, she's an X-Men. So you have a few stories, but definitely not nearly enough. I feel like we definitely need more representation in every medium, and that includes comic books.
Yeah.
I think it's so interesting that you mentioned the way that different demographics and different age groups are reached by different ways of saying the same thing. Like, yeah, you know, they're still comics, but the way that they're distributed has a lot of implications. What do you think it is about comics that makes it accessible when it comes to seeing representation?
I think it's because it's a visual medium. I love my personal comic book store. They have this slogan that says it's art meets literature, and it is.
Yeah.
And I feel like it really is for any age demographic, because when you read comics, a lot of people are just like, it's superheroes. I'm done with that. I've watched all the Marvel movies, and then you realize you could go into the comic book store, you could read a webtoon, you go on Kickstarter, and you never have to read a superhero book in your life because there's other comics out there. I always try to describe it as television. So it's like, oh, you've watched TV before, right? It's like, yeah, I love this show. And it's like, well, there's all different genres and there's all different types of TV shows. You can't say you hate television. That means you just hate storytelling. It's just, yeah, that's always so interesting. Again, going back to the webtoon form of it all, I think a lot of people read it, and because they're reading it on their phone, it's a scroll format and it's free. They're like, that's not a comic book. That's not the Marvel and DC stuff that comics are made of. Or manga is a big conversation where people are like, is manga and comics the same thing? And ultimately, yeah, they are. I mean, it's the same medium. It's just different origins, right? One's an American comic and one is Japanese. So you're obviously going to have different types of storytelling because it's different cultures, but they're still the same medium.
This is so fascinating to me, this idea that, so if I was going to tell a story about a young bi plus woman coming to the realization about her identity, the way I would write it and the way I would tell it with pictures would be totally different approaches. And to me, as someone who has very rarely seen myself in film, TV, comics, books in general, I understand. I wasn't surprised when I read the story about how successful the Kickstarter was and how quickly you got all the backers you needed. It's just like this need for community and this need for representation becomes not a desire, but a necessity. We as bi people find ourselves caught between worlds, belonging fully to neither like straight spaces or queer spaces. And this sense of invisibility can take this profound toll, right? Stories that reflect our experiences help build a shared sense of identity and foster community that affirms our existence. But I would love to hear more about your thoughts on the success of the Kickstarter. You know, what were people saying? What was the vibe when the Kickstarter was popping off?
Honestly, it's all what you said. What's interesting about this is, again, I didn't know how well it was going to do. This was our by far most successful Kickstarter at that time. And we did a submission form, and something I really want to do with these anthologies and different from other anthologies. At that time, especially Kickstarter anthologies, writers were not being paid. It was just like, okay, which is crazy, right?
Yeah.
So what would happen is that the writer would have to come up with the artists. They would have to hire their own artists, put it out of their pocket, and then pitch it to an anthology. And then the anthology would accept it, which is actually how comics work a lot of times with these indie books, is that you hire an artist and then you pitch it to a company. And then you make your money or you don't make your money back. What we want to do is do a work for hire format where we actually get to see everyone get paid. And we would help people that have never made a comic be able to pair up with an artist. And then we're like, okay, you've literally never made a comic, but your script is awesome and you want to tell your story. We're going to help you out and do that. So that's something we did. So we did a submission form. And again, at that point, it was our first anthology. We've done a couple of others now. We actually are up for an award for our hairology this coming week, one of the comic awards. That's kind of fun. Yeah. So at this point, we did a submission form and it blew up on Twitter. This is like before Elon Musk. So Twitter was a little bit easier to also blow up. We had like thousands of likes and retweets. I got some PR for it as well. And we're like, okay, this already, like a lot of people are interested. So we did the book and we made it like 40 something pages for that first volume because again, we didn't know how well it was going to do. We wanted to pay everybody. So we want to make the budget as tight as possible. I think it was like $10,000 for the budget. And again, it blew up. We made $30,000 off of it. it. It was crazy. And when the actual Kickstarter happened, the way you kind of could tell if something's gonna maybe possibly do well is that there's a pre-launch page that you usually share for me a week or two before the campaign. And if the number is low of how many followers you have, you're like, okay, maybe it won't be the most successful day one. And that's kind of how you could tell if the Kickstarter is going to do well or not. This had like 700 followers before anyone even backed. And I'm like, and that was really high for us at that time. Beast and Snow after that was a bit higher, but yeah, 700. And before I was getting, I think our highest campaign was like 500 backers. So, we more than doubled our backer count with this one. Yeah. This was really what made our careers. So it was interesting. So yeah, there were some telltales that was going to do well, but I never could imagine how well it would have done. And I think it's because, again, comic fans wanted to see it, even if they weren't bi, because like, oh, that's a really unique concept I want to learn about. But most importantly, bisexual comic fans wanted to read it. But also people have never read a comic in their life. I know we got a lot of comments about that. It's like, I just wanted to see representation. This was really cool. And this is a cool way to see it. And that's honestly, flutters my heart the most is if I could get people into the medium because of this.
Oh, it's like the real bisexual agenda were the comics we made along the way.
Exactly.
I don't know why publishers don't publish bi stories more often because just statistically speaking, we represent more than half of the queer population. And anecdotal data based on my friends who are all big comic readers and are inside kids, they eat the shit up. Like you're losing money, publishers, by not publishing bi stories. Anyway, that's
I
my
don't
bisexual
disagree.
theory. Yeah.
Yeah, I think all of us here would agree. As you're telling us about the submission process and how you had the form and people submitted their own scripts, I'm curious, what was the most surprising or interesting story that you came across?
For the first volume, the most surprising one was probably, there was a story called Bicard, and it was an action spy thriller about bisexuality. So it was these two spies getting married, and they're like, oh, well, I'll have to give my Bicard away because I'm getting married to, I think it was a woman. So it was just like, oh, because you're bi, like can't be bi anymore, depending on who you marry. And it was just a really interesting way to tell a story that is not too on the nose and just like on a fun action series that works really well with comics as well. And again, the art was really good for it. I think something I'm really proud of for the first volume in general is just how tight it was. I always say this about all our anthologies. Like, we obviously need the slice of life stories. We need the stories where you're like, this is what it feels like to be bi, or, for our trans anthology, it's like, this is what it means to be trans. But honestly, the ones we like to accept and we need to see more in the submissions forms is the genre stories, because that's what's gonna kind of like make it think outside the box. Like, you can only have as many slice of life stories as you could do. Like, out of, let's say, 14 stories, most likely we'd probably pick 4 slice of life stories. We'll pick slice of life stories all telling different types of stories, but we want horror, we want sci-fi, we want different things. I know for the story I did for the first spy anthology, I did like a slice of life story that was semi based on my life. So I was like, okay, I'll do that. And then the second one, I was like, let's do like The Bachelor. Let's do reality television.
Yes.
And talk about like queerness within this. And I did it through like a male perspective, because I was like, oh man, like we've had a couple queer ladies in The Bachelor, but not nearly enough of queer men. So like, that's kind of an interesting story. Let's talk about that. So, I mean, yeah, try telling something outside the box. And something that's been really fun with these anthologies too is that, again, you have people that's made their first comic ever, and then we'll have veteran comic creators like Gail Simone, who did a forward for us. Again, we have a really cool creator working on with us for our Ace anthology. So that's kind of been a pleasure too, is mixing all these different types of creators and writers onto these books as well.
Have you ever thought about the fact that this project is contributing to the preservation of bi stories themselves?
It's so interesting. I don't, and I should more often, because I think that's really, really cool. It's interesting because like when you're working in the creative space, you're always like thinking about the next thing, right? You're like, okay, well, this was, in which I personally have been trying to be a little better at, oh, this was successful. Great. I'm really happy with the story, but we have to move on to the next thing, which will be great representation and hopefully successful. But I think we need to, have some triumphs of our wins too. And again, especially representation. And, with bi visibility, I definitely want to do more. And I think that's something that's been interesting too, is like, again, creatively, it's like, oh, you need to give space because like you can't do this every year or else it won't be as special. bisexual, but then at the same time, bisexual representation should be happening all the time. So
Yeah.
what we've been doing is putting bisexual representation in our other comics while we're trying to build up even more for our next anthologies. Because again, we want to do the ace, we want to do trans, but I think after that, I would really like to go back to bi visibility. We didn't actually do a pansexual section, so I think that'd be really cool if we could also do like pansexuality. So, but yeah, no, I tend not to think about it, but I want to think about it more, because I think it really was special and is special, and I want to continue. I mean, that's one big part of my mission is just to do more bisexual stories, either if it's anthologies like very based on like bi visibility, or what we've been doing now with our not safe for work books, but also our webtoons. So webtoons kind of crazy because you get to do it on a weekly basis. And we have a bisexual character, and we actually added this into the trans anthology because we weren't trans ourselves, but we wanted to contribute in a way that would make sense. So we had our bisexual character talking to her trans sibling and then talking to each other about like being bi and being trans. So that was really interesting to tell in a different anthology, but still have bi representation. And yeah, again, do it on a weekly basis with the webtoon and the comics. But I think there's nothing more special than how specific bi visibility was.
Yeah, and I want to go back to underline the fact that you are, like, it was a trick question, you are preserving bi plus history. And just so you know, looking through the literature that, Lynn and I both are researchers and scholars, bi plus stories, histories have just been erased, marginalized, not copied down in the first place, to the point where we would go to our professors and say, I have nothing for you. I have no resources. I'm like, at a college, a university, you don't have it. What do you mean you don't have any resources for me? And just the sense that you're not only writing down bi stories, but capturing what it is to be a bi plus person in the world in the many, many ways that it is special and different, but also kind of a unifying experience is really great. And I hope that you do tell more of these stories because they desperately need to be told. And if I could just put in some more of my own bisexual agenda, you should do like a little bi plus, bicon history. These are the people that made us. You look back to see who was doing work in the 70s and 80s and telling their story in comic form.
I love that.
That would be lit as hell.
That's a cool pitch, honestly. That's really, really cool, especially if we did another volume for bi visibility. Because again, I think what's really cool is just getting to see different genres and different history as well. Like just learning. I mean, that's also a part of it too, is learning more. And I think that's something that was interesting about getting feedback for bi visibility was people that, knew they were bi for a long time. Being like, oh, I saw this side and I didn't know, or like, it was so interesting getting different representation. So I think you could always learn more, again, from the scholarship point of view as well. It's like you can learn more about anything. Like I've been doing comics for the longest time, but every day I'm learning more about comics. Been a bi person all my life, but every day I'm learning more about being bi.
The fact that nobody knows who Maggie Rubenstein is blows my mind. Like Maggie recently passed away and was literally called the godmother of sex education. And she was a person who was like openly bi in the 70s and 80s and was pushing along AIDS relief, right? And nobody knows who she is outside of our community. And most bi people don't know who she is either, which is just blows my mind. So anyway, I'm happy to talk more about that with you offline because I think a whole series on bi elders and our ancestry, if you will, is important. It should be put down to paper. I'm sorry, Lynn. I know you have questions too. I'm just very excited.
Honestly, as I'm writing this train of thought with y'all, I'm actually really excited too, because the way, me with my very academic lens, the way that I kind of see it is an accessible textbook. These are stories with lessons, with a perspective that a lot of bi plus folks need and capitalize on. It is hard to always see your life from such a serious lens, and I think that this is where all the different genres come in, and seeing it as like a spy story, which to me I think is really amazing. I was 100% a spy novel kind of kid growing up. I would like walk around with like my iPod, because I didn't have a phone as a kid, in my boot in case I needed to run away and figure it out. Like
become totally spies.
Oh my God, don't threaten me with a good time.
But I think that when we jump on that train, instead of trying to like quote unquote bring it back to reality, we reveal a lot more truths than if we were to just weigh it down. And to that extent, what do you think is unique about the work that you do on bi plus anthologies compared to the other projects that you're on?
I think it's just being so specific. I think that's something we like to do, but it was just such a specific project. And I think that's why it was successful. There's definitely been queer anthologies that are just as important, but might have not been able to have the reach because it was too broad. And I think with something that is so specific, it just, there it is. So I think that's been kind of interesting about it. And from our other stories, I would say anthology making and creating ongoing series are so different. We try to do like 2 or 3 anthologies a year. Some anthologies we do like invite only, and we're just like, we try to do like one, it was Rainbow Canvas, which was for Webtoon, and we invited Webtoons. And then there's the open submissions, which is so mind blowing, but also long in the best way possible. I enjoy it a lot to try to cultivate a book. But the other books are just me and my business partner kind of just working together in this think tank and putting something out there that hopefully people will enjoy. But with an anthology, you get to work with like 30 plus people and kind of get the gist of maybe how it's going to do. But when you're coming up with just a random story, like maybe it'll be good. I don't know. Like maybe it won't. I literally have no clue.
Did you learn anything about, I'm going to say bi plus people, but through this project, did you learn anything about yourself as a bi person?
One thing that I wrote this story kind of from a personal perspective of my grandma who had dementia, who, I never told I was bi because I was like, what's the point? And I told the story of like, oh, well, how if I did? And then I was like, why not just tell her? And then I called her and I was like, because I didn't know how she'd take it. And I called her and she's like, oh, I knew. And I was like, oh, you knew? And it was just a phone conversation. If she didn't remember, it didn't matter because at least I got the answers and I didn't have any regrets. And I think that's what the story is called. Will I regret it? So I was just like, oh, let's just do this. So I think that helped me because I was open with everybody else except her. And she wasn't like on the internet or anything. So she didn't have to know. But also I was more open about my queerness. I actually don't think I was out to the internet at that time because I was just making superhero books and stuff like that. But now anytime like comic people have questions about queerness, they go to me and they're like, oh, should we do that? And I'm like, it's so cool to be a queer voice for comics. But I think one thing that's all, you don't want to be just the queer creator. And it's been really fun to be a queer creator and also just have other, like, people are not just like, you're the queer creator. That's all I'm going to ask you for. So I think there's been a nice balance of that too, because I've just have such an expertise of Kickstarter too. So I think most people are like, oh yeah, Kat's queer, but also she knows a lot about Kickstarter. But I'm glad they also do think of me as a queer creator. So it's always the balancing act of that as well.
I contain multitudes. Thank you very much.
Exactly.
Precisely. And to that extent, us bi plus folks and bisexuality in general, we're far from a monolith. We're not just a single thing. And while I am very happy to call myself the resident bi academic,
sure, we
are multifaceted. And too often the stories that we see in mainstream media often flatten bi plus experiences into these oversimplified narratives that just fail to capture the liminality that we find ourselves in. We like to call it here on the podcast these liminal spaces. And they just entirely overlook the richness of our inner selves and our experiences. But bi plus folks, as we know, come from every single walk of life, from every culture, every corner of the globe. The world is entirely rich, and we are a part of that. So for you, why is it valuable to have not just more bi plus stories, but also a diverse range of bi plus stories?
For all the reasons you said, I think what's so interesting about, anything about queerness, there's endless stories. When we did volume 1 of Bi, again, I didn't know we were going to do a volume 2. I genuinely didn't. But we were like, wow, there's so much story to be told here. We didn't even scratch the surface. And then we did volume 2. We're like, we didn't scratch the surface. I want to tell more and more. So yeah, again, from the perspective of different genres, but then also different cultures, different type of relationships, or just how you see your sexuality. And yeah, no, I think that bisexuality, like you guys said, has so much multitudes. And I can't think of honestly any media besides maybe if you look at like YouTube or something where you're like, get to see a real life example that, or like scholars or like people who talk about their bisexuality a lot. But I can't think of an arc where I was like, wow, that was the pinnacle of bisexuality. And I hope that changes. Like there's been good bisexual stories. I think there's a show called Legends of Tomorrow, like that Sarah Lance, she was a great bisexual character and showed her bisexuality. or not showed, but showed that she was able to say the word bisexual, which I don't think happens enough in television, where it's like, oh, I'm bisexual. It's like, isn't that weird that that's the thing we're like waiting for? It's just even just the words of someone saying I'm bisexual. I think that's crazy. But yeah, I can't think of anything where I'm just like, that was the pinnacle. But maybe it's because there is no pinnacle of bisexuality. I think it's all different types of stories, but I do think there needs to be more space for them. I think, honestly, I feel like there's been even less than there were like pre-COVID, maybe because it has to do with, the writer's strike and everything. But I feel like we've gotten less queer stories than we have had,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that extent, what are some strategies that you and your team implement in order to make sure that you have variety of BIPOC perspective represented in the anthologies? English is my second language. Hi.
We honestly just look through the submission form and we do keywords. So when we look through the submissions, we put keywords of like, okay, this story is about a person of color. This story is about a plus size person. This story is about being with a man or whatever. So we try to put keywords. And then if we realize maybe there's overlap, we're like, okay, let's choose one or the other. That way we could fit another type of story in here. So it's hard because sometimes there's some really great stories that you have to say no to because you're like, you want to fit other topics in. But that's kind of what you have to weigh out. If we find that there's something that we really want to tell that wasn't there, I think a great example is that we were doing the trans anthology and there wasn't a Black voice that talked about the journey of being Black and trans. And we're like, well, we need that. We want that. And we talked to one of the creators we worked in the past. We're like, hey, do you want to do a story? We love your work and we really want to add this voice into the anthology. And they're like, yeah, sure. And then we got to add it and that was really important to us. So I think, we try, obviously you can't get everything because there's so much, but that's kind of how we try to get different voices. And again, different genres. We do the same thing where it's like, oh, we don't have a horror story. Let's see if there's a horror story over here.
We love intentionality. That's really good to hear it. And then also the benefit of having anthology calls, you could start to see, oh, well, there are a lot of ex-bi stories out there right now. Maybe we do a specific anthology about that or whatever it is. But having too many bi stories is not a problem, right? At the end of the day, it's like, I'm glad that story is out there and maybe we could circle back to it eventually. But as we sort of wind down the episode, what we like to do is leave our listeners with some homework or call to action, if you will, so that they can be better bisexual killjoys. But for you, for artists who wish to center bisexuality plus in their work, what is one thing you believe that they need to prioritize to be successful and authentic?
I would say research, honestly, like keep looking at different types of bisexual stories. If you saw that there was like a cool bisexual novel that came out, read it, try to hear different bisexual voices, either through podcasts or making friends or whatever, but just keep trying to learn. I think that's important. And always, again, going back to like the scholar side of it all, like you're never too big or too smart to learn. So there's always something else out there to different perspectives and everything. So yeah, just try to widen your horizons.
Agreed. You should all widen your horizons. And then for you, Kat, what can we expect from you in the next couple of months?
Yeah, we always have Kickstarters going on. Literally this Monday, we're launching the second issue of Nightmare in Wonderland, which is Alice in Wonderland, who's an assassin. She's exes with Sleeping Beauty, who is a pan character. So there you go. You could check that out. And yeah, they get stuck in a nightmare version of Wonderland. So go check that one out. And yeah, we have Kickstarters all the time. We have some LGBTQ enamel pins coming out as well. Some more pins because we do a lot of them. So yeah, check out @Comic Uno on Twitter. That's usually the best place to find all our current projects.
Awesome. This has been such a wonderful conversation today about how to represent BIPOC stories in different mediums and how far that reach can go. I think it has been truly wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kat. We look forward to getting our copy of the anthology and encourage all of our listeners to purchase these anthologies. The links will be in our show notes. We also 100% want to thank you personally for embodying the Bisexual Killjoy spirit as you continue making space for BIPOC artists and storytellers around the world.
And thank you guys for doing a podcast like this. I think it's really cool that this is out there.
Oh, thank you. And thank you all for tuning into Bisexual Killjoy, where we do know that bisexuality isn't a phase, it's a phenomenon. Thank you for listening. And if there's something you want us to talk about, you can let us know. To support us, share us with your friends and your crustiest family members so we can educate them. Subscribe to our Substack and rate our podcast, preferably 5 stars. We, of course, want to hear from you. you, so you can share your stories with us on Instagram or via email at bisexualkilljoy@gmail.com. And until then, keep being a bisexual killjoy.
Stay bisexual and stay strong.